Okay, so I'm sorry we got this breakout room started a little bit late, but I'm just going to go ahead and launch into it. So there are two topics that I wanted to talk about with you all today. The first one is in our industrial uses in Norwalk. Based on the presentation that we just heard, I'm just curious if you could tell me about what manufacturing uses that you could envision in Norwalk. And I'll just open it up for whoever wants to unmute themselves and talk. I'm here listening. And for those of you who are on the phone, just so you know, there's only about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people in this room with us. So feel free to talk. The purpose of this breakout room is to have a smaller group of people so that we have an opportunity to hear what you have to say and to hear your reactions and get your feedback on the presentation that we just gave. So please feel free to talk.
Well, I tell you, when I first moved to East Norwalk, where I live, I kind of liked the idea that we did have some manufacturing, light manufacturing.
Yeah.
I mean, we had Norden making electronics and Automatic Signal making electrical control boxes for traffic lights. Previously, I mean, long before I was here, we had at least 2 hat factories.
Yes, so I know that that's part of the history of Norwalk, actually, is hat making.
Yeah, so really, East Norwalk has always had a history of light manufacturing. So that's the kind of thing I would like to see. I really didn't like the idea of the central warehousing business that they were looking to put into Norden, but I do like the idea of some light manufacturing.
Great.
And also marine related businesses, what I'd like to see.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And if you are living in East Norwalk, if there are other people who are also from the East Norwalk area or familiar with East Norwalk, I'd love to hear you build on what Joe just mentioned. Or if you have other insights as well to other sorts of manufacturing uses that you could envision in Norwalk.
I agree with what Joe was saying, if I understand it, what he meant, because that is the way that I've always seen East Norwalk too, is a mixture of those things. And the only the ways that they cause trouble is when they're not monitored for, chemical release or smells or what kind of truck delivers at 2 in the morning when no one should be delivering at 2 in the morning or something. Those things. And that is what I see as the issue that has changed in East Norwalk in the past, um, let's say, last definitely 5 years, but actually a bit more than that. And it makes a big difference because the things that are positive, like uh, the openness, because you have the river, even if the river's being used in lots of ways all by itself, but actually create noise that you wouldn't otherwise be hearing because things echo. And they echo so much, okay, that anybody who was aware of the um, problems with the hockey rink that they tried to build, there were many, 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 many people who weren't sleeping because literally it was there was the least bit of generator noise, and there was more than a least bit to begin with, but just was jolting, and you could hear it everywhere. I mean, you could hear it down Cove Avenue. You could hear, it just reverberated everywhere, and it changed the whole character of the neighborhood until they realized that this wasn't going to work very well. So I think that's something, and once you build it, once you oh, nice, a skating rink or whatever it is somebody thinks is nice. Once you do that, you've changed it. And so you really need to anticipate beforehand what the thing you're anticipating, how it's going to change it. And I think that's where a lot of people just can't do it. They don't realize it, or they want something so much they just don't see the difference. So um, that's what I'm concerned about, because we already have. I think we have issues now that we didn't have a few years ago. And I wouldn't pick on any one thing, um, but there's some really good examples. Okay,
Hmm.
I don't want to look like I'm picking on one or the other, because that's the trouble. By each one by itself, if it's somewhat regulated and isn't creating intense noise, um, all in all sorts of hours, okay, because it's the nature of its business, um, then that kind of thing really is disruptive.
Right.
And it's always going to be a noisy neighborhood, I believe. Anyway, I'm not saying, oh, we want it to be dead quiet, but people say, oh, there's a big park. Well, yeah, but that is included too. I mean, that's the thing, um, that you need to be aware of. And just because you don't even live next door to that park doesn't mean you're not going to be aware of that park. So, for example, I was listening to a conversation in Staples where two people were complaining about the same noise, and one noise. One person was complaining about the noise on Winford Street over where they tore down the Bank of America, and the other person was complaining about a noise on near Vets Park. And it turned out it was the creator of the noise was the same thing. They each assumed they just had something they had to tolerate that was really driving them nuts.
Hmm.
And but when they identified the exact moment that they got woken up or whatever it was, it turned out, well, the more they thought about it, that it was exactly the same thing, that was causing the problem, because that's how noise spreads when there's less noise. If it so I'm not going to go on about this, but and
No,
the
but
trains
that's
kind of, but people don't think about it. I mean, and it was a shame because we have the council works so hard on some really, really good noise rules, and they're good noise rules. Okay, they really and truly are. They're a marvel. However, um, you know, the additional volume of just a few things um, can change the whole feel of everything, and really make it noticeable and unpleasant. Where once you didn't notice, people who get used to trains don't hear the trains. That's not such a big deal. But some of these other uses, because they're slightly erratic, not on a strict schedule, unpredictable, but supposed to be there all of a sudden, those are the things I think that drive people nuts and say, what am I doing here?
mhm.
So, um, anyway, that's
Yeah,
just an observation.
I think that you bring up a couple of really good points, one of which is about code enforcement and making sure that the businesses that do exist are monitored and regulated the way that any other sort of thing would be monitored and regulated, especially with noise or fumes or the sort of operation hours, that type of thing. And so I guess I'm also curious to expand on maybe on the second question that is related to what you just said, which is, would you rather see sort of small boutique manufacturing, which is something that we sort of suggested for the East Norwalk area, or larger scale light manufacturing? I think that the trade-off here is that some of the light manufacturing operations, while they might not be sort of small scale boutique operations, do offer more opportunities for employment and job growth, but they might be sort of larger in scale and might not actually be possible in some areas of the city given the scale of parcels and things of that nature. But I'm curious to hear what this group has to say about the difference between boutique manufacturing and light manufacturing.
Well, I won't say anything on that, but I think there's some related to reasons connected to why we haven't been building more hat factories, or I mean, the hats aren't the product at the moment the way they were when they were building the hat factories, but those jobs also um, ours that were most successful was underpaid labor. So really, that's not the kind of jobs that we want to be looking to have. Um, Even though we will want jobs where people can have a good job to start out in until they learn to say, oh, this is great, I love doing this, or I want to have my own company doing this, or say, gee, I think I'd rather be doing something else. And the other problem with that kind of work is that um, business is that it also often has real problems with creating things that you don't necessarily think of as problematic for everyday life in terms of health and stuff like that. But the issues with lint and fabric treatment and stuff like that. There are pieces of East Norwalk that are still recovering from the factory store, the hat factories being there, the chemicals, the amount of money that was it took to clean up that pond um, down by the ice cream places um, was substantial and required the help of at least two truly committed congressmen to do it. So it's not like you can just say, "Oh, geez, look what happened to the pond. I guess we better clean it up." That's not the way it works. You may decide, "Oh, yeah, that's true," but it doesn't just happen. So I think some of the things that we used to have might work better now, but than they did when they were here in terms of being disruptive. But I'm not sure we want to just assume that because they were here before that we would want to have them here again. That's how I see it. So.
And I'm curious. Sorry, I just got here, so I have
No
no
worries.
idea anything. Hi, Linda. I have no idea, Stephanie. I have no idea of anything that came prior, but it's my gut reaction is it depends on the area, because I think of small scale boutique manufacturing as being paired with retail, so that might be more geared to activating some sort of daily use where the community is interacting, whereas sort of larger light scale and I could be making this up, I think of the point of sale being somewhere else. And I see it as more of a job creator. And I think Linda made a good point about what kind of jobs that they are, but hopefully they would be equitable. So like in East Norwalk, for example, based on some of the things we've talked about there, small scale makes a lot more sense because we're trying to activate those uses. But in other parts of the city, maybe the larger scale makes more sense.
That's a great point. Yes, I do believe that it definitely matters the location. And I'm curious, we've talked a bit about East Norwalk and maybe the appropriateness, but also some of the challenges of boutique manufacturing on the ground floor. But maybe do you have thoughts about, where it's appropriate to have some of those larger light manufacturing uses occur in the city? If it's not East Norwalk, then there are other areas of the city as well to consider.
I won't pretend to know enough about all the needs, but I'm not sure I would say East Norwalk could not support some larger scale light manufacturing. Like I think about, what is that over there by like Fitch and, a CrossFit on Strawberry Hill. Like there are some lots that, are set back and whatnot, where as long as the noise is not a residential factor, I do think urban planning makes more sense the more integrated it is, as long as it's not like a health hazard, right? So sort of trying to get every single type of manufacturing in one area doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
I think, excuse me, I think Stephanie might be referring to the factory that actually I think now makes most of its stuff in Puerto Rico, but is has been back behind exactly how you're describing it, Stephanie.
Mhm.
And it makes all those beautiful leather goods and things, and has a big sale in
Yes, yes.
Is that Dooney and Burke?
thank you, that's
Yes,
it, right.
that's right.
But
I
that's a
always
good, I
forget
think,
it there until that sale.
right. I think it's a good example, but also if it is a good example, then I don't know all the details of it, but I know they've had, a whole sort of sets of problems they didn't used to have, and so they might be a good way to view, if saying, oh yeah, that's a really good kind of sort of neighborhood. It's not quite an arts place, but everybody likes the fact that it's there, sort of thing, and then we might find out what the problems are with that, or not. I mean, that's why I'm not being negative. I'm just saying, because there's been a lot of pressure on that place. I gathered, but I don't know anything really and truly about it, except that things have changed. So but I think it's visually and in terms of noise and everything. You described it just right, Stephanie. I don't even quite know what's there, but because it doesn't really bother anybody.
Yeah,
So,
I never noticed this there.
right, and you have to be careful because other people don't notice it's there either, and they have a parking lot back there, and then people go zipping in and out. But I think it's a really
Linda,
good
you're on.
example.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say you're on the phone. You don't see the slides have changed. I think new questions are coming.
Oh, I
And
just
I'm
wanted
gonna
to make
let
sure
somebody else
that
talk.
no, this
Sorry.
is a great conversation. And the point is that we have a very small group here of just 6 people or so. So people should have the opportunity to
Oh, right.
voice
No, I
voice their
agree.
opinions.
Sorry.
But I think that I just want to make sure we have time for the second topic as well. And we can kind of tie it into what we were just talking about, I thought it was an interesting point that you raised about sort of the visibility versus the not visibility of sort of these industrial uses. Some of them might contribute better to the public realm, such as a boutique manufacturing and retail, and others might be more job generators that don't necessarily have a public realm aspect or lesser so. And so I guess I'm curious, when it comes to the waterfront, which is obviously a huge asset in the city, what is the sort of most important aspect of the waterfront to you, and what would you like to see happen with it, given the sort of mix of uses that already happen there? There's such a diversity of things that happen, from the concrete plant to sort of boat storage to fishing and oyster farming. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the desired future for the Norwalk waterfront.
Interesting. I'll say, and I'm assuming everyone else is on mute. They don't want to speak, and I don't want to leave you hanging out here by yourself. And I'm sure Linda feels the same. So we're talking, but anyone else should please save us, chime in. I lived here for 3 years before I even realized there was a waterfront. And I say that because I think it's one of those gems that I won't say it's hidden, obviously, because obviously you pass water, you see it all the time, but it's lacking for me that accessibility that makes it a draw. Like, yeah, I don't know how else to explain it, but I remember being here for years, like, oh, how come we never go to the water?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's maybe something along the lines of sort of not just accessibility, but even identity or kind of a sense of a destination. Maybe I'm gonna be a little bit brash and call on Joe, because Joe, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about East Norwalk that you wanted to see more marine-based uses. So is there more that you wanted to expand on, sort of maybe linking to the previous comment about sort of the identity of the waterfront and accessibility of it? And Joe, you're on mute currently, so if you wanted to speak, you can unmute yourself.
Or like most of us, like I was multitasking in another Zoom.
That's okay. I mean, if there's any, and I appreciate you keeping me company during this breakout group. But Linda, is there anything that you also wanted to add about the waterfront since you're?
Well, I'm trying not to say any. I think I said enough for everybody in the room. Sorry, but no, I think it's something. First of all, in many ways, it's sort of at an ebb right now because of it, as opposed to what it's been in the past. Simply because there is so much activity that having to do with city growth and building and housing, and that has, and the bridge, the railroad train, the trains, and before you even get to the dislocations of the pandemic. But the bottom line to that is that all those other things that we just took for granted that really were hard to miss. Although I, like Stephanie, moved here at the other end of town and didn't know there was a river down here till eventually I went over it in a train, but not a boat, a train. But I think that if you were seeing it at more if hopefully if it's going to return to its former self, of as a natural place of activity, water centered activity, and maintaining that, and all the groups that have traditionally worked to make that, you know, feasible, because it's a lot of energy and a lot of money. And I mean, that's how the Oyster Festival came, to be. And I don't know what the future of the Oyster Festival should be. I'm not talking about that, one way or the other. But I'm just saying, there were a lot of things that fit together. And part of the reason, I think, was to the credit of the people that were truly understood, the fishing and the being out on the water in a boat, not necessarily with flags flying, but out, and the kind of care it took to support the water as a resource without having it, suddenly sort of turn into, I think it might end up looking like a big water ride at Disney World or something. And you really wouldn't want that, is what I'm saying. I don't think. And so the treasure may be that all this other stuff, so growth and the stuff that has been positive in many ways, hasn't mutilated the river, and that maybe we should say, yeah, and that's really important, and maybe the biggest contribution the river can be is to be protected and to be appreciated for being just that, for you to be able to be on it or close to it or looking at it, and not and feel like you are. We won't necessarily choose Maine, but you really are on the river, or you really are near the river, or this is something special. And I see why Norwalk grew around this river. Even though they don't need those smelly, um, you know, boats for supplies anymore and stuff like that. So, and I think it's a very big challenge. And I also think to be able to do this in the future. And I also think that given our greater appreciation of the all the things we need to do to keep things green and healthy and supportive of all the things we've decided we really should have, which is less less not making a mess of the climate any more than we already have. And so the river as a centerpiece for all that um, fits in really nicely. But actually, what it contributes is the power of not doing too much to it and allowing it to be there and be a place that people want to be near or walk by or look at, but not necessarily build on it. I mean, in any way. I mean, there's always going to be a place to go get something else. In fact, most of it's already here somewhere. But you know, and there's certainly enough food venues in one corner of the road down there to do it, and on this side to do it for they contribute to a lot of that kind of stuff. But I'm saying, look at the river, and also I don't know how much, even though I've been to a bunch of planning meetings, I don't know how much the CAM rules, the coastal area management rules, are supported and appreciated as an originally a very good recognition of how what taking care of the coastline meant. Coastline meaning the river line too, and how much important that was for all the things that belong with the river, the pond in East Norwalk that when it was messed up was truly horribly messed up, and it was just stunning to see all the work that went into just cleaning it up. But once you did that, suddenly you had a lot of things coming back that hadn't been there in 40 or 50 years. I mean, things that belonged there in the first place, birds, swans, all sorts of things. And so there's plenty of people who had no experience of that because they're they're relatively new, or they never saw it, or they never knew that if you never knew it was there, then you don't miss it, kind of thing. But the discussion of building on the Wells Fargo lot, of building a heavy amount of condominiums there, the piece of that I heard, really, it was as if they were in denial of the fact that whole parking lot shouldn't have been there in the first place. And then when it was put in, it was it was put in with people, Norwalk, and not just people who lived in that area, other people saying, that's not what that's what the coastal area management thing, because it is part of that, because it feeds into the river right there. It is part of that that law. That's what it was there to do, was to protect wetlands so that the pond could exist and the river could exist and the oysters could exist, and that they wouldn't all just one way or another bury each other. So
Linda,
I'm going to stop. But anyway,
could I ask? They're asking us to wrap up. You can't see the pop-up, but to the question about uses, are you saying that it would be great to make sure the ponds are clean and like everything is well maintained, but is the use just natural beauty, or are you saying that then the use should be activated in some other different way? Like, should there be a walking path to the pond and from the pond, or is its very existence and attracting wildlife, etc., the use that you would like to see?
Well, I'll try to say it briefly. There are many things there that weren't there before in all sorts of different ways that would probably be able to easily disappear if it got mistreated again. And I don't, and there's so many ways. I mean, those discussions, without being the point of the discussion, the things about that will ruin this or that will ruin that, are hardly taking place. And I don't think that it's because people don't care. I think a lot of people really care, but I think a lot of people have no clue that had been that way for a long period of time, because all those light industrial uses were pouring all their chemicals and everything right in there, and in the pond, for example. But what goes in the pond, or what goes upstream, and where sewage was collecting and things like that, those things really matter.
No, I get that, but for right now, we're talking about uses of the waterfront. So I'm trying to understand if you're saying, so let's assume modern day, like from this point onward, everything is preserved, maintained, etc. Is the use that you think is most ideal just for these natural bodies to exist, to just improve our environment, like the beauty of our environment, or would you like to then see something else occur around it?
I think this is a very useful question, and I'm sorry to cut it short, but I think that we're having to wrap up our conversation, and I just want to make sure that we don't do that awkward thing where someone starts talking and then we all get cut off. So maybe if it's possible to go back to the main meeting, you can click leave room and then leave breakout room, and then we can all return to the main session. And I'm going to stop my recording, and I'll see you back in the main room. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.